Hi, everyone. My name is Marcelo Tournier. I am a physician and also a data scientist working here in Apixio in Silicon Valley. And I'm really glad to be invited to speak about something that I'm so excited, which are clinical ontologies, which is a thing that it looks kind of fearsome when you get your first gaze at the names, but it's actually just knowledge engineering, knowledge augmentation, and a lot of techniques that can give you a new insight about the data that you have. And I'm here to cover the basics of clinical ontology with you in this short talk. So my idea here is just to give you an introductory knowledge about it, so you can get your feet wet if you think that's your thing. And also I will start talking a bit about clinical data and clinical data types as well, because I know that sometimes people ask me, well, what do I have to learn to start working in NLP in healthcare? And I think that clinical data, especially if you look at the structured data, it's a very good way to start to understand how healthcare data is organized. So I will start just a little bit about me. So I am a physiatrist by training, a medical doctor, and I had the blessing of working in almost all areas of healthcare, from emergency rooms to primary care units in very socially deprived areas in Brazil, and also other areas such as rehabilitation medicine and business consulting in healthcare. I have 2 master's degrees, one in innovation and the other statistics. And throughout these last years, almost a decade, I worked with epidemiology as a practitioner in the industry, not in academia, working with workplace health promotion and occupational environmental health data in huge amounts of data. And I started to work with a lot of different languages across the time until my latest mastery in languages is YAML, which if you're a data scientist, you know that's the official data science language. And I have a small Shih Tzu dog named Lily. And if you have a Shih Tzu like myself, you know who's the boss in your home. Just a quick tip, it's not you. So just let me give a little bit about Apixio as well. And just a little disclaimer, we are hiring. And if you're interested, just look at my email address on the beginning of this presentation video. I'll be more than glad to talk to you and talk more about the company, how cool it is. So we have a lot of artificial intelligence and natural language processing algorithms, which are a mix of open source and proprietary stuff that's way similar to Google and Facebook, not only in the way in which the technology is architectured, but also in the scale of the data that we process. In the latest year, we are able to process a few petabytes of data in a very short amount of time. We're very proud of that. And we are not only, of course, concerned about the scale of this data, but also in the metrics and the correctness of our machine learning algorithms, so we can deliver to our clients, which are payers and providers across the United States, the clinical insights that they need to take better care about their patients and also promote a more value-based healthcare, which is something that we firmly believe, and most of the technology that we build is related to that. So it's just a quick overview about what we do essentially on risk adjustment areas or prospective insights about what are the probably most likely future conditions that the patient has, and helping then these providers on better organizing their workflows. What I will show today is extremely related to what we try to solve. And we usually say in the company that this is the most precious asset in healthcare. That's not money, it's time. Because if you look at the physician time, for instance, I know by my experience that you usually spend 1/3 of the time on a visit looking at an EHR and trying to do some chart review. That's extremely frustrating, and you don't spend most of your time with the patient, which is the center. It should be the center, right? But unfortunately, technology and the cycles that we have, because badly designed technology, this is starting to get us as providers way more frustrated with the care that we should deliver to our patients. But now these tools that should help us, sometimes they are a hurdle. And that is very hard to understand as well. So if you look, for instance, as a typical visit note on text, and most of the data that we receive in healthcare is text, which is extremely interesting for one side, for the NLP practitioner, such as I am right now. But on the other hand, there is a huge challenge to normalize this data because, well, different medical specialties use it, different jargons, different abbreviations, different acronyms. You have differences in the way in which some notes are structured depending on the EHR system that this provider is using, or sometimes some geography takes place because providers in one region of the country write on their notes on a different way than providers on the other region of the country, for instance. And if you want to take a look at the problem lists, for instance, to see how current it is, the problems that the patient have, good luck, because most of these text that you find on the electronic health record on the EHR is copy-paste. So you can imagine the amount of garbage that you have in this data. And we have here some studies that they have an interesting perspective in terms of how frustrating could be for providers, and not only for providers, but for us NLP practitioners, to navigate and extract some value from this kind of data. On one hand, it shows that perhaps it's one of the most challenging data types right now to work in the AI industry, and that's why we see a lot of people migrating to healthcare. But on the other hand, as well, it's extremely stimulating for us to try to find out new ways to extract knowledge from this. And as a starter, I would like to give you a basic understanding on how these ontologies and how it's applicated in healthcare as well. Why do we look at ontologies? And for some people, ontologies seems like so 2000 or 90s, because that's from when these things started to kind of mingle into the semantic web. But we'll see that this is pretty current, and a lot of companies still use and leverage ontologies to bring their data into another level. So my idea here is to talk about ontologies in more layman terms, and I don't want to dive deeper into concepts. I will provide some literature to you if you are interested in learning more about ontologies and the semantic web and their applications in NLP in the end of my talk. And you should decide if that's what you have to learn, or hire somebody, for instance, in your company that's more acquainted to these kinds of technologies. So I will start with what is an ontology. An ontology is a way to organize knowledge about a topic so a user could extract more value from the data. And that's one of the simplest ways that I could find to explain what is an ontology, because if you go to the spec from WTC or any other semantic web foundations, you see that they have a lot of fancy words, that because it's an extremely complex concept. But I think that the most simple way to get a basic understanding of what it is, it's a way to organize knowledge. And it's all about the graph, baby. It's all about encoding knowledge in a way in which machines could start to take the basic information from a given piece of data and start to get some meaning from it. So, for instance, if I have in a text these three or these two entities, John and 1945, I could have some other inference in the text, for instance, that would show that this, for instance, this patient's date of birth is 1945. For instance, I have DOB tag or other piece of text that could be tagged as an entity that could show that the patient was born in 45, and you could extract easily this way a very simple graph that contains two nodes, which are the words John and 1945, and the predicate, which is an adjective of this word. It's a quality that will join these two concepts. And you see shortly how these things can escalate and bring more knowledge for us. For instance, about how Bob can be interested in Mona Lisa, and that's essentially how we could start to build graphs and get more meaning for other things. And perhaps if we see here that Bob is interested in Mona Lisa, perhaps Bob could be interested also in other works of Leonardo da Vinci. And for instance, you could present to Bob the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, or the blueprints of the flying machine, or the Vitruvian Man, or any other thing that could relate to this first entity that Bob is interested in. Relating to healthcare data, we can start to build some very elaborated representations of what the patient has. So, and we call that a knowledge graph. So this is an example of a knowledge graph with some nodes, which are entities like diseases like the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a dermatosis. But it happens that the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is related to a lot of other things than extremely elastic skin. You could one could augment this graph easily, showing that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome can have some chronic joint degeneration, can have, for instance, cardiac problems or other things. And we can have this way a lot of different inputs that could increase, if you want to use the knowledge graph as a product or a part of the product, the interpretability of the data. You could use it, of course, and that's one of the most useful ways, in my opinion, to grab labels, for instance, is to do model augmentations or even increasing the predictability gains by bringing new assumptions to the data. As I said, generating training data is a good use case. Or let's say you want to automate some boring tasks of the workflow. If you qualify this workflow using a knowledge graph, you can connect parts of the workflow that are parts of these entities into something that gets, for instance, an auto update for the problem or medication list on an electronic medical record system could be leveraged with way more ease with a knowledge graph, instead of relying on a lot of hard-coded ifs, which, well, if you're a programmer like myself, you feel the shivers on using a lot of hard-coded ifs, especially if you work with machine learning. And one of the most interesting things, in my opinion, is bringing the foreign assumptions to the data. And what are those foreign assumptions? Let's say that you have a mapping from a disease to another disease that's not related on the patient notes. So let's say that this patient has hypertension, and you have, for instance, as a foreign assumption, hypertension can map to a lot of other complications, even though these complications will not appear on the text. these foreign assumptions can show you some insights to how these patients, or if these patients can have some kind of underlying condition that's unexplored. And that's a kind of, that's one of the exciting uses for knowledge graphs in the field. So I will show some examples of well-known ontologies, and some people use those things without even realize they are ontologies. So coding systems in healthcare are one of the most well-known ontologies, and they are ontologies because if you look at the way in which a clinical code is organized, you will easily figure it out. So here's the ICD-10. The ICD-10 is one of the most common coding systems in healthcare. One of the coolest things about the ICD-10 is that, as the name says, it's international. So you have a normalized international classification of diseases, which will refer to a same code anywhere in the world mapping to the exact same disease. So that's a very efficient way, for instance, for physicians who, well, they don't have to speak the same language, but if they share some clinical codes about this patient and some of the conditions of the patient, they can have a good idea what's going on. And as you see, the category of the code, the first three numbers encode some knowledge, such as, for instance, the first letter sees, if you see, maps to some injuries or poisoning or consequences. And if you look at T, for instance, the letter T, as tango, maps to trauma. And the other two letters will show more details about it. So you go one step further on this tree, on this ontological representation, to look at how this, or what kind of trauma is this, or what kind of injury is this. And 86 map to an injury of the muscle. And all the other numbers that you have on the right-hand side will map to the anatomic site, severity, a lot of other information that can be more granular as you go further to the right. And we have other concept maps, such as Nomad, for instance, which is way more detailed than ICD. And Nomad serves for the purpose of mapping not only diagnosis, but it could map almost every single medical fact related to a patient or to the context of healthcare. So circumstances about patient visit or family history or, medications, procedures, whatever. If you look at SNOMED-CT, you see how deep it could be and how could you map one concept to the other and build, for instance, knowledge graphs using or leveraging what we have in concepts in SNOMED and relating these concepts to each other. And finally, national drug codes, which are the prescription codes that we usually have from these patients. NDC codes usually are organized on a way in which it's more sensible in terms of product. But if you take the FDA table, which I put the link here as a convenience, you would see that actually you could reorganize these drug names in another way and make your ontology look something more feasible to use for a clinician. Mapping drugs, for instance, or brand names to a generic name and the generic name to a pharmaceutical class, and then getting the pharmaceutical class to know which pharmaceutical class can treat a given disease. And then you have you have a mapper from drug to disease. You have other codes, as I'm showing here, for instance, CPT and ICD-PCS, which are codes that map to given medical procedures as well. The idea is the same of the other codes. I will not spend a long time here. Now I will show you a small demo of something that I built in Python using a very nice stack. I used PySpark, PyTorch through the APIs of Hugging Face, which did an amazing job in the community to help us having very robust BERT transformer models easily deployed almost anywhere. And I will take those to build a knowledge graph so we can play with this. So I will show the demo quickly. And I have the Github repository, as you can see this link here. You can go and download it and play with it. That's yours. It's mine. It's open source, so you can play with this thing. So I put here a small disclaimer. This is not optimized for performance, okay, guys? So please don't judge my code. The idea here is just for you to have an idea of how this thing works. So I put here the dependencies that you should work with. One of the trickiest is Graphis. Graphis, I recommend you to take a look at the install guide in their website. They have a thorough detailed guide to show you how to install in your operational system, because depending on the operational system, you should have different specs to look at. So I will start with something, just a hack, because I have multiple Spark environments, Spark guy, so my machine is almost running out of memory all the time. And since I have multiple Spark environments running on Conda, I just have to do this hack to change to the proper environment, and I can load these libraries. You should see ontologicals here. This is just a small library that I built here with some stuff to help us out to running the notebooks. One of the most interesting is Tagger Pipeline. It's a class that convolves Hugging Face transformers loaded as PyTorch models. And I took one of these models from Hugging Face that contains a named entity recognition tagger. It's a good tagger. It's not a bad one, but there's a lot of space for improvement. As you see here in the label list, you have a couple of entities that they take care of, like a problem, treatments, and tests. So there are these three entities that they use. And the training is cool. They did a nice job training. As a suggestion, if the author is hearing, I would love to see more clinical types. So I will create a Spark context here. I am a Spark context guy because I like to use RDDs, old-fashioned way. Not only that, but you will, in my experience, that's almost my experience, but I run into less serialization issues when I use RDDs, and I pass, for instance, some classes into the Spark serializer. Usually, I run into less trouble than using the UDFs. But it's totally like you, so you don't have to worry about me. Let's create a tagger pipeline here and take some fake data that I put here, like a fake record page, so we can see these entities. And let's tag the sentences. Let's map it. I will transform into a data frame now because it's easier for us to visualize. And if you want to do any other further transformations in the data, it should be easier for you, perhaps, to look at that. And I also want you to show how these patient entities were extracted and organized as well. So, okay, it's running. Bear with me. It's running local. So it should take a few seconds. All right. Yeah, and you have the schema here with a data frame that contains problems. I have the tags here if you want to process the tags for other purposes, and the original text. Of course, if you're working with healthcare data and you're paranoid as I am, you should get rid of any PHI as soon as possible so you don't have any leakages. Spark is prone to leakage if you use cache, so that's another thing that won't cover here. A small digression, just as a suggestion. All right, so you're on the problems, treatments, and tests. The ID for the patients and the extracted entities. I will take these entities from the Spark data frame and unnest them for the sake of simplicity. So I will take a list of entities here because I would like to show you a very simple ontology that I built here for this purpose. So that's essentially what I was showing you. I have here subjects, predicates, and objects. And I just created this grammar here with those arrows to be easier for you to relate to what I was showing you earlier on the slides, like this one. So that's essentially what I'm doing here. I am making these graphs so we can parse the information that we have here into knowledge graphs. So I will take these strings and transform these strings with ontologicals on a triple store. I will not take the concept of triple store here for the sake of time, but it's essentially a list with these subjects, predicates, and objects. That's all that you have to know. And now we can parse that information that we have about the patient keywords from the beginning out of the tagger processing to the knowledge graphs. So I have a loop here just to process these things and show the knowledge graphs for you. And yeah, that's it. That's the magic. So that, and as you can see, I took all of that information and the triples relating to that, and I can show here how all of these tokens can relate to each other, and also some foreign assumptions that I put on purpose on the knowledge triple store as well. Of course, that's a very naive implementation of a triple store, and also the direct mappings that I did can be very noisy on real-world situations. So there are other more sophisticated techniques for graph inference that I will not talk about here for the sake of time and for the target audience, which is an introductory audience, so you can get started with this. And as you can see, you have very cool graphs here. If you run the notebook in your machine, you should get them as well. And just to finish my talk, I would like to give you these references. And those are nice references if you want to look at semantic modeling on the data and the semantic web as well. It's like the Matrix. You take the red pill and you go down the rabbit hole, and you'll probably not get back. So I would like to thank you all. And again, leave my email if you want to talk more about what we do in Apixio or have more questions about knowledge graphs. I'll be more than happy to talk to you guys and address the questions right now. Thank you so much.